The notification chimed while I was stirring pasta sauce, just another Tuesday evening until I glanced at my phone. Sophia's text glowed on the screen. I think we should take a break. 3 years of marriage, condensed into 7 words. I set my wooden spoon down, wiped my hands, and picked up the phone. The strange part wasn't the message itself. We'd been orbiting each other lately, speaking without communicating. The strange part was the calm that settled over me, like finally hearing a diagnosis for symptoms I'd been ignoring. Okay, I typed back. Only later would I learn about Ethan's return to town. Her ex, who'd always lingered in stories she told. Only later would I understand what taking a break actually meant. But in that moment, my simple response revealed something I hadn't fully recognized. Sometimes, the most dignified answer to betrayal is simply, okay. The Tuesday evening ritual had become as familiar as the framed wedding photo on our mantel. Sophia chopped vegetables while I marinated the chicken, a choreographed dance in our kitchen that required few words. 3 years of marriage had taught us each other's rhythms. The Andersons invited us for dinner Saturday, I said, sliding the chicken into the oven. I told them I'd check with you first. Sophia nodded, her knife continuing its steady rhythm against the cutting board. That should be fine. I watched her for a moment, the slight furrow between her brows, the way her shoulders had tensed slightly at the mention of weekend plans. Something had changed in recent weeks. Our conversations had become functional rather than intimate, like colleagues sharing an office rather than partners sharing a life. Everything okay? I asked, leaning against the counter. Just tired. Her standard response lately. Work's been crazy. The photo on our refrigerator caught my eye. Us laughing on a beach last summer, her head thrown back in genuine joy. That version of Sophia seemed increasingly distant, replaced by someone physically present, but emotionally elsewhere. We could skip the Andersons if you want, I offered. Just have a quiet weekend. No, it's fine. She scraped the vegetables into a bowl, her movements efficient. It'll be nice to see them. I nodded, accepting her answer while noting the lack of enthusiasm. The gap between us was widening, one small interaction at a time. Guess who moved back to town? My co-worker Marcus mentioned casually over lunch 3 days later. Ethan Reeves. Remember him? Dated Sophia in college before you two met. The name registered immediately. Ethan featured prominently in Sophia's college stories, her first serious relationship lasting nearly 4 years before he took a job across the country. The breakup had been his decision, she'd once told me. Something about needing space to grow. Ran into him at the gym, Marcus continued. Said he's starting at Meridian Technologies next week. Meridian, where Sophia worked as a project manager. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the sudden tightness in my chest. Small world, I said, forcing a smile. That evening, I mentioned it casually. Marcus saw Ethan today, said he's back in town. Sophia's hand paused briefly as she scrolled through her phone. Oh, yeah, I heard he might be coming back. He'll be working at Meridian, apparently. Really? Her surprise seemed rehearsed. She set her phone down, screen side down. Small world. Over the next week, the pattern became clearer. Sophia's phone constantly within reach, screen always angled away from me, late meetings that hadn't appeared on her calendar before. The slight startle when I entered a room unexpectedly, as though I'd interrupted a private thought. I watched, I observed, I waited, giving her space to say what needed saying. But the words never came. Just the growing silence between us, filled with notifications that made her reach for her phone with an urgency she no longer showed for me. We sat at opposite ends of the sofa, the television murmuring in the background, neither of us watching, both pretending to. Sophia had been unusually quiet through dinner, checking her phone repeatedly. Now, she set it down deliberately and turned to face me. "Daniel," she began, her voice carefully controlled, "I need to talk to you about something." I muted the television and turned to her, already suspecting what was coming. "I think we should take a break." The words hung in the air between us. I studied her face. The way she'd rehearsed this moment was evident in her measured tone, in how her eyes met mine then drifted away. "A break," I repeated. "What exactly does that mean, Sophia?" She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed more frequently lately. "I need some space." "Time to think about things." "Things," I echoed. "Does this have anything to do with Ethan being back?" A flicker of surprise crossed her face, quickly composed. "This isn't about anyone else. This is about us. I just feel like we've been going through the motions." I could have argued, could have reminded her of our vows, the life we'd built, the plans we'd made. Could have asked directly about the texts she'd been hiding. Instead, I simply nodded. "Okay." Now surprise registered openly on her face. "Okay? If you need space, I won't stop you," I said quietly. "What are you thinking logistically?" Relief replaced her surprise. This was going more smoothly than she'd anticipated. "I could stay with my sister for a while, just until I figure things out." "And the lease? The bills?" "Practical matters, easier to discuss than the dissolution of dreams." "I'll still cover my half, of course," she said quickly. "Nothing changes financially." "This is just temporary." I nodded again, watching as she already began mentally cataloging what she would take. Something in her certainty told me this break was anything but temporary. "When were you thinking of leaving?" I asked. "Tomorrow, if that's okay." The speed of her response confirmed what I already knew. This decision had been made days, perhaps weeks ago. "Okay," I said again, the word containing all I needed to say about dignity in the face of inevitable endings. The first rent notification arrived 2 weeks after Sophia left. I set it aside, assuming she would fulfill her promise to handle her half. We'd agreed to maintain separate financial responsibilities until she figured things out. I sent a casual text reminder. No response. The second notice came a week later, now with a late fee attached. I called her cell, straight to voicemail. I left a measured message about the pending payment, keeping my tone neutral. Just checking in about the rent. The property management company sent a second notice. Days passed. Nothing. I tried email next. "Sophia, I need to know if you're planning to cover your portion as we discussed. Please let me know either way so I can plan accordingly." The reply never came, but her social media showed new photos. Dinner at an upscale restaurant I recognized as Ethan's favorite. Her smiling face against the backdrop of a place we'd never been together. The third notice arrived marked "Final Warning" in bold red letters. This time, I paid the full amount myself to avoid eviction proceedings. That evening, I sent one last text. "I covered this month's rent. I need to know your intentions going forward. This affects my financial planning." The property manager called the following week. "Mr. Hayes, we noticed Ms. Hayes' name is still on the lease, but our records show she hasn't been paying her portion. Would you like to discuss your options?" The bills continued to accumulate. Utilities she'd promised to cover, subscription services she still used but no longer paid for. Each one a small betrayal, building into something impossible to ignore. My savings dwindled as I covered the gaps she left behind. My final message went unread. "I need to make decisions about the lease. Please respond by Friday. if you intend to maintain your financial responsibilities. Friday came and went. Her silence was the only answer I needed. I sat at the kitchen table, spreadsheets open on my laptop, calculating the financial impact of carrying the entire lease myself for the remaining months. The numbers weren't encouraging. I could manage for a while by cutting back on nearly everything, but the strain would eventually become unsustainable. Marcus arrived with pizza, setting it on the table before taking a seat across from me. "How bad is it?" 6 months left on the lease. "About 15,000 total if I cover everything myself." He whistled softly. "And still no word from her?" Radio silence. I closed the laptop, suddenly tired of staring at the evidence of broken promises. The property manager explained my options. I can either keep covering everything, try to find a roommate, or enforce the terms of the lease agreement. What does that last one mean exactly? Since Sophia's still legally on the lease, they can send formal notifications about her unpaid portion. If she doesn't respond, they'll eventually remove her belongings from the premises, according to the abandonment clause. Marcus considered this while helping himself to pizza. Seems fair. She made a commitment. But her things would be donated or disposed of after the waiting period, I added, the thought creating a heaviness in my chest. Photos, books, everything she left behind. That's on her, not you, Marcus pointed out. You've tried to reach her how many times? 12. You 15? I nodded, turning the decision over in my mind. This wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries, about acknowledging the reality of what was happening rather than enabling a fiction that everything was temporary while I bore the consequences alone. I keep thinking there must be a reason she's not responding, I said. Something I'm missing. Maybe, Marcus conceded. But you can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when they've already walked away. The truth of his words settled into me. I'd been waiting for explanations that weren't coming, making excuses for behavior that had no justification. Perhaps the kindest thing, for both of us, was to allow natural consequences to unfold. I'll talk to the property manager tomorrow, I decided, feeling a strange combination of sadness and resolution. It's time to deal with what is, not what I hoped would be. The property manager's office was clinically efficient, all clean lines and neutral colors. Ms. Patel slid the formal notification across her desk, pointing to each section as she explained the process. This letter will be sent to all contact addresses we have for Ms. Hayes. She'll have 14 days to respond and arrange payment of her portion. If she doesn't, we'll proceed with the abandonment process for her belongings still on the premises. I nodded, scanning the document. The language was impersonal, reducing 3 years of marriage to tenant obligations and contractual responsibilities. And if she does respond? I asked. Then we'll work out a payment plan for the arrears, and she can arrange to collect her belongings. Miss Patel's expression softened slightly. Most people do respond once they receive formal notice. I signed where indicated, my signature authorizing the beginning of the end. And if she doesn't? After the 14-day period, we'll inventory and photograph everything, then arrange for donation to local charities. You'll receive documentation of the entire process. 2 weeks passed with no response from Sophia. I received notification that the formal letter had been delivered to both her work address and her sister's home, where she'd initially said she would stay. Still, silence. On the 15th day, I stood in my apartment as 2 staff members from the property management company methodically cataloged Sophia's abandoned possessions. Books she'd loved, clothes she'd carefully selected, framed photos of her family, all reduced to line items on an inventory sheet. We partner with Women's Haven for clothing and household items, the lead staff member explained as they packed everything into labeled boxes. They help women starting over after difficult situations. There was a certain symmetry to it. Items left behind by someone moving on would help others doing the same. Not destruction, but transition. Not punishment, but redirection. I signed the final inventory sheet, acknowledging the removal of all items. The apartment felt different afterward, emptier, but also cleaner. As if a long-held breath had finally been released. Later that evening, I received the donation receipt by email, officially documenting that the possession Sophia had abandoned had found new purpose. I printed it and filed it away, a record of necessary endings and the boundaries that make them possible. 6 months after Sophia left, I stood in an apartment that finally felt like mine alone. Gone were the empty spaces where her belongings had once been, now filled with pieces that reflected only my choices. A leather reading chair occupied the corner that had held her desk. My photography, a hobby rediscovered in solitary evenings, hung where family portraits had been. The silence no longer felt like absence, but like peace. I'd established new routines: Sunday morning runs with Marcus, Thursday night cooking classes at the community center, daily meditation that helped me process rather than suppress the lingering questions that might never be answered. The divorce papers had been finalized 3 weeks ago, the process surprisingly straightforward given Sophia's continued absence from my life. My attorney had served her at Meridian, where she still worked despite rumors that her relationship with Ethan had already begun to fracture. "You're doing well," my therapist had observed during our final session last week. "Better than most people would be after what you've experienced." It wasn't that the pain had disappeared. Rather, it had transformed into something more useful: discernment. The ability to recognize when someone's words and actions didn't align. The courage to enforce boundaries without guilt. The wisdom to understand that some questions would remain unanswered, and that was okay. Tonight, I had plans to meet friends at a new restaurant downtown, the first social outing I'd initiated rather than merely accepted since the separation. A small step, perhaps, but one that felt significant. Life continuing, not just enduring. The restaurant hummed with conversation and laughter, the kind of place where tables were placed close enough that accidental interactions were inevitable. I was early for meeting my friends, nursing a drink at the bar when a glass of red wine spilled across the counter, narrowly missing my sleeve. "I'm so sorry." The woman beside me quickly grabbed napkins. The bartender bumped my elbow. "No harm done," I assured her, helping to mop up the spill. "Though I think your wine is a casualty." She laughed, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Occupational hazard of dining solo at crowded bars." "Also dining solo?" I asked, finding myself oddly comfortable in this spontaneous conversation. "Meeting a client who's perpetually late," she explained. "I've learned to bring a book." She gestured to the novel next to her purse. "Smart strategy. I'm Daniel, by the way." "Ava," she replied, accepting the replacement wine the bartender hurriedly provided. "You waiting for someone, too?" "Friends," I nodded. "They're still about 20 minutes out. Then you have time to settle a debate." She turned her book toward me. "Is this worth finishing?" I'm on page 98 and still waiting for it to grab me. I examined the literary thriller she'd been reading. "If it hasn't hooked you by page 50, it's probably not going to. Life's too short for mediocre books." Ava's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "That's exactly what I needed. Permission to abandon it. Thank you for the literary absolution." Our conversation flowed easily after that, from books to travel to our respective careers. She was a corporate trainer, helping businesses improve communication systems. Unlike the guarded exchanges that had characterized my final months with Sophia, Ava spoke directly, asked questions, and actually listened to the answers. "My client just canceled," she said, checking her phone with a wry smile. "Apparently there's a situation at the office that requires immediate attention." "Their loss," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "Would you like to join me and my friends for dinner? They're good people, I promise." She tilted her head, considering me with unexpected directness. "I'd like that, but I'd also like your number, so maybe we could have dinner just the two of us sometime?" The straightforwardness was refreshing. No games, no hidden meanings, just honest interest. "I'd like that too," I said, and meant it. 3 weeks and 4 dates later, we sat on my sofa sharing takeout and stories from our days. Being with Ava felt different, easier, more authentic. She asked about Sophia once, listened without judgment, then simply said, she missed out on someone who actually understands what commitment means. With Ava, I found myself relaxing into a relationship built on mutual respect and clear communication. We moved slowly, both of us carrying lessons from past relationships, neither rushing nor hesitating. For the first time in years, I felt understood rather than merely tolerated. The notification arrived on a Sunday morning as Ava and I prepared breakfast in my kitchen. The familiar ping of my phone barely registered until I glanced at the screen and saw the name I'd removed from my contacts months ago, Sophia. I set down the coffee pot, my hand suddenly unsteady. "Everything okay?" Ava asked, noticing my expression. "It's Sophia," I said, the name feeling strange on my tongue after so long. "She just texted me." Ava's knife paused over the avocado she'd been slicing. "After all this time, what does she want?" I opened the message, a sense of dread building as I read the words on the screen. "Daniel, I need to talk to you. Things with Ethan ended badly. He's not who I thought he was. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm so sorry. Can we meet, please?" I handed the phone to Ava, watching as she read the message, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Are you going to respond?" she asked, setting the phone back on the counter as if it might bite. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to know what happened. Another part thinks it doesn't matter anymore. As if on cue, another message appeared. "I know I have no right to ask after how I treated you, but I'm scared, Daniel. Ethan is angry and unpredictable. I don't know what to do." Ava's eyes met mine. "That sounds concerning." "It does," I agreed. The weight of responsibility I no longer wanted settling across my shoulders. But I also know Sophia can be dramatic when things don't go her way. A third message arrived. "I'm staying at my sister's again. Ethan knows where she lives. I don't feel safe." "Do you think she's really in danger?" Ava asked, her tone carefully neutral. I stared at the screen, trying to separate genuine concern from the lingering pain of betrayal. "I don't know, but I can't just ignore this if she might be." "What are you thinking?" Ava's question was gentle, free of judgment. I should at least respond, I decided. Tell her to contact the police if she feels threatened. Set clear boundaries about not getting personally involved. As I typed a measured response, I felt the fragile peace of recent months suddenly threatened, not just by Sophia's unexpected return to my life, but by the complicated feelings her messages stirred. The fear that by acknowledging her at all, I might be opening a door better left closed. "Sent," I said, placing the phone face down on the counter. "Now we finish making breakfast and try to salvage our Sunday." Ava squeezed my hand, her support silent but palpable. We returned to our cooking, but the easy atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by an unspoken tension, the past casting its shadow over the present, just when I'd thought I'd finally stepped into the light. What began as a single message on Sunday morning grew into a steady stream over the following weeks. At first, Sophia's texts maintained a veneer of restraint, apologies mixed with vague references to her troubles with Ethan. "I know I hurt you terribly. I just need someone who understands. Ethan is telling people lies about me at work. No one will listen. I keep thinking about how different things would be if I hadn't left." I responded minimally, offering basic advice about workplace harassment procedures and suggesting professional resources. Each time, I established clearer boundaries. "I'm sorry you're going through this, but I'm not in a position to help beyond this advice. I think it's best we limit our communication. I've moved on with my life. Please respect that I've established a new relationship." But the messages only intensified, arriving at all hours, during work meetings, dinner with Ava, even in the middle of the night. The tone shifted from apologetic to increasingly desperate, then accusatory. "You always said you'd be there for me. Was that a lie? I saw you and her at the cafe yesterday. Already replaced me? After 3 years of marriage, you won't even talk to me?" Ava noticed the strain it was creating. "Your phone keeps lighting up," she said one evening as we prepared dinner. "It's her again, isn't it?" I nodded, showing her the latest message, a rambling paragraph about how Ethan had poisoned everyone against her, and how I was the only one who knew the real her. "She's getting worse," Ava observed, her brow furrowed. "Have you considered blocking her number?" Before I could answer, a new notification appeared, not on my phone, but on Ava's. We both froze, staring at the screen. "It's from her," Ava said quietly, holding up her phone to show a Facebook message request. "How did she even find me?" The message was simple but chilling. "He'll get tired of you too. Ask him about Chicago." Chicago, a business trip I'd taken alone 3 years ago, during which Sophia had convinced herself I'd been unfaithful despite having no evidence. A completely fabricated accusation she'd eventually apologized for, yet now weaponized against my new relationship. The intrusion into Ava's private space crossed a line that transformed my annoyance into genuine concern. This was no longer about me navigating post-divorce communication. It was about protecting someone I cared about from becoming collateral damage in Sophia's personal crisis. Ava's phone rang the following Tuesday morning while we were both getting ready for work. The call lasted less than 5 minutes, but her expression transformed from confusion to shock to controlled anger. "That was Marissa from HR," she said after hanging up, her voice carefully measured. "Someone sent an anonymous email to the entire executive team suggesting I've been falsifying my training certification credentials." I set down my coffee cup. "Sophia?" Ava nodded grimly. The email included details about my previous employment, my certification dates, even mentioned our relationship as a potential conflict of interest with a client that doesn't actually exist. "This is insane," I said, anger building. "She's attacking your professional reputation now. Fortunately, Marissa knows me well enough to question it immediately," Ava explained, gathering her things with quick, efficient movements. "But I need to go in early to address this before it spreads. The executive team receives hundreds of emails daily. Some might only see the accusation without reading the retraction." "What can I do?" I asked, already reaching for my phone. "Nothing yet," Ava said firmly. "Let me handle the professional side first. I need to document everything and meet with legal." I drove Ava to her office, the tension in the car palpable as she made calls preparing for her impromptu meetings. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a deliberate attempt to damage Ava's professional standing, her livelihood. The email came from an anonymous account, Ava reported after her first meeting, calling me from her office. But it traced the login to a Meridian Technologies IP address. Sophia's workplace, I confirmed, the pieces fitting together. Our legal team wants to know if we're planning to pursue a restraining order, Ava continued. They need to know what official documentation they can expect regarding this situation. A restraining order, I repeated, the words feeling both extreme and suddenly necessary. Is that what you want to do? Daniel? Ava's voice softened slightly. She's escalating. First personal messages, then social media, now my workplace. What's next? This isn't going to stop on its own. By the time Ava returned that evening, the situation had stabilized professionally. Her company had issued internal clarifications, and their legal team had preserved all evidence. But the damage to her sense of security was done. I never thought I'd be in this position, she admitted, as we sat on the couch, the remains of takeout dinner on the coffee table between us. Having to defend myself against someone I've never even met. I'm so sorry, I said, the weight of responsibility heavy in my chest. This is happening because of me, because of my past. No, Ava said firmly, taking my hand. This is happening because someone is making choices that hurt others. You're not responsible for her actions. Her words cut through my guilt with their simple truth. I wasn't responsible for Sophia's choices, but I was responsible for how I responded to them. We sat at my kitchen table that evening, a legal pad between us filled with notes from our respective days. Ava had spoken with her company's legal counsel. I'd made preliminary calls to a family attorney who specialized in protective orders. The lawyer I spoke with said we have grounds for a civil protection order, I explained, reviewing my notes. The pattern of escalating contact, the false accusations to your workplace, the implied threats, it all builds a case for harassment. Ava nodded, her expression thoughtful. My company's legal team said the same. They're prepared to provide documentation of the email incident. But you're still hesitant, I observed, recognizing the conflict in her eyes that mirrored my own. Part of me worries this will only escalate things further, she admitted. Make her more desperate. I've been thinking about that too, I said. Whether legal action might make things worse. But I keep coming back to the same conclusion. She's already escalating on her own. Without clear boundaries, where does it end? We fell silent for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging between us. There's something else, I finally said. Something I've been reluctant to acknowledge. What if she really is in some kind of trouble with Ethan? What if there's something legitimately wrong beyond just wanting attention? You think her claims about him might be true? Ava asked. I don't know. But if they are, and she's genuinely unstable right now, maybe a formal legal process is actually safer for everyone. It creates structure, documentation, consequences. Ava reached across the table, taking my hand. This isn't about punishing her. It's about establishing boundaries that protect all of us, including her, ultimately. Her words crystallized what I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. This wasn't revenge for Sophia's betrayal or punishment for her harassment. It was about creating necessary structure when informal boundaries had failed. So we proceed with the protection order, I said, the decision settling into certainty. Yes, Ava agreed. First thing tomorrow. I'll contact the attorney again in the morning, I said, gathering the notes into a folder. He mentioned needing documentation of all contact attempts, so I'll compile everything tonight. As I organized the evidence of Sophia's increasingly erratic behavior, I felt an unexpected sense of calm. Not the passive acceptance I'd shown when she first asked for a break, but the steady resolve that comes from making a difficult decision for the right reasons. Protection, not punishment. Boundaries, not revenge. The path forward was clear, even if the journey would be difficult. The county courthouse loomed ahead, its stone facade imposingly formal compared to the emotional chaos that had led us here. Ava and I met our attorney, Rachel Klein, on the steps, a woman in her 50s with a calm, assured demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "I've reviewed all the documentation you sent," Rachel said, as she guided us through security. The text messages, social media contact, and especially the workplace harassment provide a strong case for a protective order. We followed her to a quiet conference room where she spread several forms across the table. A civil protection order requires evidence of a pattern of behavior that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety or suffer significant emotional distress, Rachel explained. The documentation you've provided meets that standard. I studied the forms, the legal language transforming Sophia's erratic behavior into clinical categories: harassment, stalking, credible threat. "The process begins with this petition," Rachel continued, pointing to the primary form. "You'll need to detail the specific incidents, dates, and nature of the harassment. Be factual rather than interpretive, just the observable behaviors." As I filled out the forms, I found myself hesitating over certain details. The donation of Sophia's abandoned belongings, for instance, would, including that, make this seem retaliatory rather than protective. "Include everything relevant," Rachel advised, noticing my hesitation. "The judge needs the complete context. This isn't about punishment. It's about establishing appropriate boundaries going forward." Ava sat beside me, occasionally squeezing my hand as I documented each incident. Her workplace harassment required its own addendum, complete with statements from her HR department. "What happens after we file?" I asked. "The court will review the petition today. If approved, a temporary order goes into effect immediately, and a hearing date will be set within 14 days. Sophia will be served with notice of both the temporary order and the hearing date." "And if she violates the temporary order?" Ava asked. "That becomes a criminal matter," Rachel explained. "Which is why it's important to document any contact attempts after the order is issued." An hour later, we stood at the clerk's window as our petition was officially filed, the stack of papers disappearing into a system designed to transform personal chaos into orderly resolution. "Now we wait," Rachel said, as we exited the courthouse. "I'll call you as soon as the judge makes a determination on the temporary order." As we walked to the parking lot, I felt an unexpected lightness. Not happiness exactly, but the relief of taking measured action rather than simply enduring escalating intrusions. We had chosen protection over passivity, boundaries over bitterness. Rachel called the next morning while I was at work. "The judge granted the temporary protection order," she said, "but there's something else you should know." I stepped into an empty conference room for privacy. "What is it?" "When I filed your petition, it triggered a flag in the system," Rachel explained. "There's another active case involving Ethan Reeves." My grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of case?" "Another woman filed for protection against him 3 weeks ago, Jessica Winters. She also works at Meridian Technologies." The information landed like a missing puzzle piece suddenly found. "You think there's a connection to Sophia's behavior?" "I can't say for certain, but the timing is interesting," Rachel replied. "Miss Winters' petition describes manipulation and threats after she attempted to end their relationship. According to her statement, they dated briefly while he was still seeing someone else, a woman she describes as his primary girlfriend. "Sophia," I murmured. "That would be my guess," Rachel agreed. "There's more. My colleague who's handling Mrs. Winter's case mentioned that during their preparation for her hearing, she revealed that Ethan had shown her private photos of a previous girlfriend as a form of intimidation when she tried to break things off. The implication was clear without being stated: blackmail, coercion. "Is there any way to verify if Sophia was the woman in those photos?" I asked, my mind racing with uncomfortable possibilities. "Not directly, no. That would require Sophia's cooperation," Rachel said, "but it might explain her erratic behavior. If she's being manipulated or blackmailed by Ethan, yet also discovering he's been unfaithful, it would create a perfect storm," I finished, thinking about Sophia's desperate messages, about Ethan not being who she thought he was, about feeling unsafe. "This doesn't excuse her harassment of you and Ava," Rachel added firmly, "but it might provide context." After ending the call, I sat alone in the conference room, processing this new information. If Ethan was manipulating multiple women, using intimate material as leverage, Sophia's increasingly desperate behavior took on a different dimension, not justified, but perhaps more comprehensible. I had spent months viewing Sophia solely as my antagonist. Now, I had to consider whether she might simultaneously be someone else's victim. The realization didn't negate the need for boundaries. If anything, it reinforced that formal structures might be the safest approach for everyone involved. By the time I left the conference room, my resolve had only strengthened. The protection order wasn't just about shielding Ava and myself anymore. It was about establishing the kind of clear, documented boundaries that might ultimately protect Sophia as well. The hearing room was smaller than I'd expected, more administrative than judicial. A court officer directed us to a table facing the judge's bench, while Rachel arranged our documentation in precise order. The temporary order had been in place for 12 days without incident. Sophia had been served at her sister's address and had made no attempt to contact either Ava or me since. I scanned the room nervously, half expecting to see Sophia, but Rachel had explained that respondents often didn't appear at these hearings. "All rise," the court officer announced as Judge Rivera entered, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. The hearing proceeded with methodical efficiency. Rachel presented our petition, the evidence of harassment, and Ava's workplace incident. Judge Rivera reviewed the documentation carefully, occasionally looking up to ask clarifying questions. "Mr. Hayes," she said finally, "why are you seeking this order now, after several months of the described behavior?" "We tried setting informal boundaries first," I explained. "But when the harassment escalated to targeting my girlfriend's professional reputation, we realized more formal measures were necessary." The judge nodded, making a note. "And there's been no contact since the temporary order was served?" "None, Your Honor." After a few more questions, Judge Rivera set aside her notes. "Based on the evidence presented, I find sufficient cause to grant a civil protection order for a period of 1 year, prohibiting Sophia Hayes from contacting either petitioner directly or indirectly, including through social media or third parties, and requiring her to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from both petitioners and their workplaces." Relief washed over me. The formal pronouncement created a clarity that informal boundaries never could. "Thank you, Your Honor," Rachel said as we gathered our materials. Outside the courthouse, Ava hugged me tightly. "It's over," she whispered. "It feels strange," I admitted. Necessary, but still strange. We were halfway to the parking lot when my phone vibrated with a notification. Despite having removed Sophia from my contacts, I recognized her email address immediately. The subject line read simply, "Important, about Ethan." I showed Ava, who frowned. Technically, email contact violates the order. I know, I agreed. But you're wondering if it's related to what your attorney told you about the other case, Ava finished for me. About the possible blackmail. I nodded, staring at the notification without opening the email. If she's in some kind of danger, let's call Rachel first, Ava suggested pragmatically. Find out the proper way to handle this without violating the spirit of the order. As we headed back toward the courthouse to speak with our attorney, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had reached the end of one chapter only to discover the beginning of another, one that might reveal a very different story than the one I thought I knew. The email remained unopened, a digital Schrödinger's cat containing either more manipulation or a truth I wasn't yet prepared to face. Either way, the boundaries we'd established would remain. A framework for whatever came next. Back in our apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, Ava beside me. Rachel had advised us that while responding directly to the email would violate the protective order, we could read it without reciprocating contact. If it contained relevant information about potential criminal activity, we should forward it to authorities rather than engage directly. "Are you ready?" Ava asked, her hand steady on my arm. I nodded and opened the email. "Daniel," it began, "I know I can't contact you directly because of the protection order, which I understand and accept. I'm sending this to be forwarded to the proper authorities, not to reestablish communication with you. Ethan has been blackmailing me with private photos and videos taken during our relationship. This began shortly after his return to town, when I discovered he was simultaneously dating at least 2 other women at Meridian. When I confronted him and tried to leave, he threatened to send the material to my family, friends, and coworkers. I became desperate and unstable, believing my only protection was maintaining a relationship with him while trying to find the devices where he stored the material. This is why I behaved so erratically toward you and Ava. I was being manipulated and feared exposure daily. I've learned he's done this to at least 3 other women. One of them, Jessica, has also filed for protection. I'm writing this because I've decided to testify against him regardless of consequences. The detective handling Jessica's case is David Morales with the county's Special Victims Unit. The email ended with contact information for the detective and a simple closing line. "I'm sorry for everything. This doesn't excuse what I did, but I hope it explains it." I stared at the screen, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. The explanation aligned with what Rachel had already discovered about the other case, lending it credibility. Yet years of broken trust made complete acceptance difficult. "What do you think?" I finally asked Ava. She considered the email carefully. "It's consistent with the pattern your attorney mentioned, and the fact that she included the detective's information rather than asking you to contact her directly suggests she's respecting the boundaries." "True," I agreed. "She's not asking for reconciliation or forgiveness, just providing information relevant to a potential criminal case." "What will you do?" Ava asked. "Forward it to Rachel first," I decided. "Then see if we can verify the detective's involvement before proceeding further." As I composed the forwarding email to our attorney, I found myself reflecting on how quickly life's narratives can shift. For months, I'd seen Sophia solely as someone who had betrayed and then harassed me. Now, a more complex picture was emerging. One where she was both wrongdoer and victim, her actions inexcusable, yet possibly coerced. This doesn't change the need for the protection order, I said, thinking aloud. Of course not, Ava agreed. Boundaries can be maintained while still supporting justice. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Her wisdom crystallized my own thoughts. The protective order wasn't about punishment. It was about creating safe structure. And within that structure, perhaps there was room for a different kind of justice to unfold. Detective David Morales had the measured demeanor of someone who had seen humanity at both its worst and its most resilient. We met in a small conference room at the police station, with Rachel present to ensure our communication remained within legal boundaries. "I appreciate you bringing this information forward," Morales said after reviewing the forwarded email. "And yes, I can confirm that I am investigating multiple allegations against Ethan Reeves, including a case involving Jessica Winters." "So Sophia's claims about blackmail are consistent with your investigation?" Rachel asked. "Without disclosing confidential details of an active investigation," Morales replied carefully. "I can say that we've documented a pattern of behavior involving the coercive use of intimate images to control multiple women." I nodded, processing this confirmation. "What happens next?" Sophia mentioned potentially testifying. "We're building a case for criminal charges of blackmail, coercion, and possibly distribution of intimate images without consent," Morales explained. "Victim testimony is critical in cases like this, especially when multiple victims can establish a pattern." "Would Sophia's harassment of us affect her credibility as a witness?" Rachel asked. "It complicates matters," Morales acknowledged. "But her disclosure of the situation actually strengthens the overall case. It shows the ripple effects of this type of coercion, how victims can become entangled in destructive behaviors due to manipulation and fear." He turned to me directly. "Mr. Hayes, I understand you have a protective order against your ex-wife, which must remain in place. However, would you be willing to provide a statement about the timing and nature of her behavior changes? This could help establish the timeline of when the coercion began." I glanced at Rachel, who nodded subtly. "And I can do that," I agreed, "as long as it doesn't require direct contact with Sophia." "Absolutely not," Morales assured me. "Any testimony would be provided separately, and the protective order will be fully respected throughout the process." "What about the evidence itself?" Rachel asked. "The intimate material he's using for blackmail?" "Our cybercrime unit is working to locate and secure all copies," Morales said. "We've already executed search warrants on several devices. But these cases are challenging. Digital material can be stored in multiple locations, including cloud services." As the meeting continued, Detective Morales outlined the investigation process with clinical precision, while I processed the emerging reality that Ethan's manipulation had created victims beyond just Sophia. The way he weaponized intimate trust wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a calculated pattern of control and harm. "We'll need your formal statement within the next week," Morales concluded, "and I'll keep your attorney updated on any developments relevant to your situation." As we left the police station, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The protective order against Sophia remained necessary. Her actions, regardless of motivation, had caused real harm. But understanding the broader context allowed me to view the situation with more nuance, separating the boundary violations from their complex origins. The conference room at Rachel's law office became our planning center, with documentation spread across the table. Rachel had invited Detective Morales to join us, along with Assistant District Attorney Elena Martinez, who would be prosecuting the case against Ethan if charges were filed. "Based on the evidence gathered so far," Martinez began, We're preparing to charge Ethan Reeves with multiple counts of blackmail, coercion, and non-consensual distribution of intimate images. The testimony from multiple victims creates a strong foundation. Where do we fit into this? Ava asked. You don't need to testify about the harassment directly, Martinez clarified, but Daniel's statement about the timeline helps establish the pattern of coercion. It shows how Sophia's behavior changed after Ethan's return, and threats began. Rachel nodded. We've prepared a written statement that provides the relevant information without compromising the protective order. Speaking of which, I said, we want to be absolutely clear that while we support the prosecution, the protective order against Sophia needs to remain in place. Completely understood, Morales confirmed. The protection order serves a distinct purpose. Supporting the larger case doesn't require direct contact between you and Sophia. Martinez added, in fact, maintaining those clear boundaries strengthens the overall case. It demonstrates that actions have consequences, even when influenced by coercion. We spent the next hour developing a coordinated approach. I would provide my written statement about the timeline of events. Rachel would work with the prosecutor to ensure all evidence transfers happened through proper channels. The protective order would remain intact, with any necessary communications going through attorneys. There's one more consideration, Morales noted as we concluded. If this goes to trial, you may both be in the courtroom at the same time as Sophia and Ethan, though seating will be arranged to maintain appropriate distance. We can handle that, Ava said, her voice steady, as long as the boundaries are clear. As the meeting wrapped up, I found myself reflecting on the strange path that had led us here. 6 months ago, I'd said okay to a break that shattered my life. Now I was part of building a case that might protect multiple women from someone who used intimacy as a weapon. This feels right, I told Ava as we left the office. Supporting justice without compromising our boundaries. It's like you said when we first discussed the protective order, she replied. It's about protection, not punishment. The irony is that by maintaining these boundaries, we might actually be helping Sophia more effectively than if we'd tried to directly intervene, I observed. As we drove home, I realized that maintaining boundaries wasn't about building walls. It was about creating the kind of structure where healing and justice could coexist. The protective order would remain a necessary framework for our safety and peace. But within that framework, we could still support a process that might ultimately free Sophia and others from a different kind of violation. Not through direct rescue or intervention, but through the steadfast defense of truth and the patient work of justice. The courthouse corridor bustled with activity as I waited with Rachel outside courtroom C. Today was Sophia's scheduled testimony in the case against Ethan Reeves. Though I wasn't required to attend, Detective Morales had suggested my presence might provide context for the judge as long as I maintained the distance required by the protective order. Remember, Rachel said quietly, you'll be seated in the back row. Sophia will enter from a separate door and testify without having to pass near you. I nodded, watching as ADA Martinez approached with a folder of documents. Mr. Hayes, she greeted me. Thank you for being here. Sophia arrived 20 minutes ago and is in a separate waiting area. She's been informed of the seating arrangements and understands the protective order remains in full effect. The courtroom doors opened, and we filed in. I took my seat in the back as instructed, with Rachel beside me. The room had the hushed formality of spaces where consequential truths are spoken, all dark wood and muted colors. When Sophia entered from a side door with a victim advocate, I barely recognized her. 6 months had transformed her, Not just physically, with her hair cut short and her face thinner, but in her bearing. Gone was the desperate instability I'd last witnessed. In its place was something quieter, more contained, yet somehow stronger. She was sworn in, her voice steady as she promised to tell the truth. Martinez led her through the preliminary questions, establishing her relationship with Ethan and the timeline of events. "When did the blackmail begin?" Martinez asked. "3 weeks after we reconnected," Sophia replied. "After I discovered he was seeing other women at work and tried to end things." As she described the escalating control Ethan had exerted through threats to distribute intimate images, her voice remained level, though her hands gripped the rail of the witness stand. "Did you tell anyone about these threats at the time?" "No," Sophia answered. "I was too ashamed. I thought I could handle it myself by finding and deleting the images." "What changed?" Martinez asked. Sophia's gaze remained fixed forward, never turning toward where I sat. "I met Jessica Winters at work. We realized we were both being manipulated by the same person. That's when I understood it wasn't just about me. It was a pattern, something that would continue happening to others if we didn't speak up." Her testimony continued with clinical precision, describing dates, specific threats, and attempts to placate Ethan while searching for the incriminating material. Through it all, she maintained a dignity that spoke of hard-won clarity. When Ethan's defense attorney cross-examined her, attempting to paint her harassment of me as evidence of unreliability, she didn't deflect. "Yes, I sent those messages. I harassed my ex-husband and his girlfriend. I was desperate and terrified, but that doesn't excuse my actions. That's why I accepted the protective order without contest. It was necessary and appropriate." As Sophia was escorted from the courtroom through the same side door, I found myself reflecting on the strange circuitry of harm, how damage travels through relationships, transforming victims into unwitting perpetrators before finally, hopefully, resolving into truth. The prosecution called its 5th witness today, Rachel informed us a week later, spreading photographs across her office table. "These women have never met each other, yet their stories follow the same pattern." The images showed 5 women, all different in appearance, but united by their connection to Ethan Reeves, Jessica Winters, whom we'd heard about initially, Sophia, whose testimony I'd witnessed, and 3 others, Megan Chen, a software developer, Elise Weber, an administrative assistant, and Tara Rodriguez, a data analyst, all from Meridian Technologies. "Each woman describes the same sequence," Rachel continued. "Initial charm followed by increasing control, discovery of his involvement with others, attempt to leave, then blackmail using intimate images." 5 women, Ava said quietly. "And those are just the ones who've come forward." Detective Morales nodded grimly. "Based on digital evidence recovered from Reeves's devices, we believe there may be more. We found folders containing images of at least 8 different women." "Has he been confronting the witnesses?" I asked. "He's been surprisingly subdued in court," Martinez replied. "His attorney is focusing on trying to exclude digital evidence rather than attacking credibility directly." "Which isn't working," Morales added. "Our cyber unit has established chain of custody for all recovered materials, and with 5 separate victim testimonies showing identical patterns, the digital evidence almost becomes secondary." What struck me most about the case wasn't just Ethan's methodical predation, but the courage of the women who had stepped forward despite the personal cost. Each had endured both the original manipulation and the public exposure of coming forward. Each had chosen truth over protection from embarrassment. "The women have been supporting each other through the process," Martinez noted, as if reading my thoughts. "They formed an informal network, coordinating court attendance so no one has to face these proceedings alone. Including Sophia? Ava asked. The question I hadn't found words for. Yes, Martinez confirmed. Despite the protective order keeping her separate from you, she's become something of a coordinator for the others. Since she was the first to connect the pattern, she's been helping the newer witnesses understand the process. I sat with this information, processing its implications. The woman who had once harassed us out of desperate fear was now helping others navigate their own paths to justice. The protective order between us remained necessary. Our relationship was irreparably damaged. But in this separate space, something healing was occurring. What happens next? I asked. The prosecution rests its case tomorrow, Martinez explained. Then the defense presents their side. Based on the evidence and testimony so far, we're optimistic about the outcome. As the meeting concluded, I found myself reflecting on how justice operates, not as a single dramatic moment, but as a community of voices gradually assembling truth from fragments of painful experience. Each woman's individual story, while powerful, gained its full significance when joined with others, revealing a pattern larger than any single experience. What had begun as my personal betrayal had expanded into a recognition of systemic harm and potentially systemic healing. The call came on a Tuesday evening as Ava and I were preparing dinner. Rachel's name appeared on my phone screen, and I answered with the speakerphone activated so Ava could hear. "Daniel, Ava," Rachel began, her voice carrying the measured satisfaction of professional victory. "I wanted you to hear this directly. Ethan Reeves was arrested this afternoon after the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts." I set down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables, exchanging a look with Ava. "All counts?" I echoed. "Blackmail, coercion, unlawful surveillance, and non-consensual distribution of intimate images," Rachel confirmed. The judge revoked bail pending sentencing, citing the pattern of manipulation and likelihood of witness intimidation. "What kind of sentence is he looking at?" Ava asked. "Martinez believes between 4 and 7 years, given the multiple victims and premeditated nature of the crimes," Rachel replied. "Sentencing is scheduled for next month." After disconnecting the call, Ava and I stood in momentary silence, processing the news. The justice we'd contributed to supporting had been realized, not through personal confrontation or revenge, but through the patient mechanisms of a system designed to uncover truth. "It feels strange," I finally said, returning to the vegetables. "Like an ending that isn't really an ending." Ava nodded, understanding as always. "Because it doesn't undo what happened. It just creates accountability." "Exactly. And while I'm relieved he can't hurt anyone else for now, I keep thinking about all those women, about what they're still processing." We moved around the kitchen, completing dinner preparations in the comfortable synchronicity we'd developed. The news about Ethan had created closure of sorts, but it existed alongside the ongoing reality of our lives that had been fundamentally shaped by both betrayal and the response to it. Later that evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Ava asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between us. "Do you ever wonder what will happen with Sophia after all this? Whether she'll be okay?" I considered this carefully. "I hope she finds healing," I said finally. "Not for my sake, but for hers. The protective order was necessary. Her actions caused real harm, regardless of the circumstances. But I don't wish her continued suffering." "That's one of the things I love about you," Ava said, taking my hand. "Your capacity to hold both boundary and compassion in the same thought." Her words crystallized something I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. The journey from that first okay to this moment had taught me that boundaries weren't walls designed to punish. They were structures that created space for both protection and possibility. The formal notification of Ethan's sentencing arrived by email the following month. 6 years, with the possibility of parole after 4. The message included a note from Detective Morales. All victims have been notified. Your written statement helped establish the timeline that supported their testimony. Justice was served because people chose truth over silence. As I shared the news with Ava, I realized we had reached the end of one chapter. Not through dramatic confrontation or neat resolution, but through the steady work of truth-telling and boundary maintenance. Whatever came next would be built on that foundation. 1 year after Ethan's sentencing, Ava and I sat on the balcony of our new apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The protective order against Sophia had expired the previous month, though neither of us had seen or heard from her directly. Through mutual acquaintances, we'd learned she had moved to another city for a fresh start, something I understood all too well. "It's strange," I said, turning my wine glass slowly between my fingers. "When Sophia first said she wanted a break, I just said okay, because I didn't know what else to say. I had no idea that single word would mark the beginning of such a journey." Ava leaned against my shoulder, her presence warm and steady. "Do you think you'd respond differently now, knowing what you know?" I considered this thoughtfully. "I'd still say okay, but with a different understanding. Back then, it was passive acceptance. Now I see that sometimes okay is the most dignified response possible to situations we can't control." "You taught me something important through all this," Ava said. "That boundaries aren't walls we build to punish others. They're structures that create space for healing, for everyone involved." "Including the person who violated them in the first place," I added, thinking of how the legal boundaries we'd established had ultimately protected Sophia too, giving her a framework to escape manipulation and find her own voice. The city lights began to flicker on below us as darkness gathered, each window representing lives with their own complex stories of loss and renewal. I think the hardest lesson, I reflected, was learning that compassion without boundaries isn't really compassion at all. It's enablement. True compassion includes the courage to say, "this far and no further." Ava nodded. "And that justice isn't about vengeance or getting even. It's about restoration, creating the conditions where truth can emerge and healing can begin." We fell silent for a moment, comfortable in the space between words. The painful journey that had begun with betrayal had transformed into something neither of us could have anticipated, a deeper wisdom about human relationships that extended far beyond our specific circumstances. "I wonder how many people stay in harmful situations because they confuse boundaries with cruelty," I said. When really, the kindest thing we can sometimes do for ourselves and others is to simply say okay and let natural consequences unfold. As night settled fully around us, I realized that the greatest gift of this difficult path was not just finding Ava, but finding a truer version of myself, someone who could balance firmness with mercy, protection with compassion, and most importantly, who understood that life's deepest wounds often become our most profound teachers if we have the courage to listen